There is a place that exists beneath everything. Beneath the soil where seeds grow and roots drink water. Beneath the stone foundations of ancient cities. Beneath the deepest ocean floor. A place that has no sunlight, no birdsong, no wind. A place where time moves differently, or perhaps doesn't move at all. The ancient Greeks called it the underworld, and they believed it was real, not a metaphor, not a symbol. A place as real as Athens, as real as the Aegean Sea, as real as Mount Olympus itself, just unreachable by the living. Every person who ever died went there. Every hero, every farmer, every king, every slave. Death was the great equalizer in the ancient world, and the underworld was where that equality was finally enforced. And ruling over all of it, silent, patient, absolute, was a god that most people feared to even name. His name was Hades, and this is his story. Welcome back to Gods of Olympus. Last time we followed Poseidon beneath the waves. Today we go somewhere even deeper, somewhere darker. Settle in. Let the world outside fade for a while. Part 1. The Forgotten Son. Hades was the firstborn son of Cronus and Rhea, the very first child of that divine union, which means he was also the first to be swallowed. Think about that for a moment. The god who would eventually rule the realm of the dead spent his earliest existence inside his father's stomach, in complete darkness, alone. Before his sisters Hestia, Demeter, and Hera were swallowed. Before his brothers Poseidon and Zeus. Hades was there first, and he waited the longest. When Zeus finally forced Cronus to release his swallowed children, they emerged in reverse order, youngest first, oldest last. Zeus came out last going in, first coming out. Hades came out last. He had been trapped inside his father longer than any of the others. What does that do to a god? The myths don't say directly, but Hades, in almost every story, carries something that his brothers don't. A stillness, a gravity, a sense of someone who has learned to be patient in a way that goes beyond ordinary patience, because he had no other choice. He fought alongside his siblings in the Titanomachy, the great war against the Titans, and the Cyclopes gave him a gift for his role in freeing them, just as they gave Zeus the thunderbolt and Poseidon the trident. They gave Hades a helmet. Not just any helmet. A helmet of invisibility, the helm of darkness, which made its wearer completely unseen. In the war against the Titans, Hades used it to move through the battlefield without being detected, striking from the shadows, undermining the Titan forces from within. It was a fitting gift for a god who would spend eternity unseen, ruling a kingdom that the living could never visit and return from. Part 2. The Darkest Kingdom. When the three brothers drew lots to divide the universe, Hades drew the underworld. Some versions of the myth suggest this was not entirely random, that Hades, being the eldest and most solemn, was simply the most suited for the role. Others suggest he was simply unlucky. Either way, the kingdom of the dead became his. And what a kingdom it was. The Greeks imagined the underworld as a vast realm beneath the earth, divided into regions, each with its own character and purpose. It was not simply a place of punishment. That is a later idea, influenced more by Christian concepts of hell than by genuine Greek belief. The Greek underworld was more complex than that, more nuanced. At its entrance, the souls of the newly dead would gather. They had been guided there by Hermes, the messenger god, who also served as the escort of souls, the psychopomp, the one who walks between the worlds of the living and the dead. To enter the underworld, souls had to cross a river. Several rivers, actually, each with its own name and its own significance. The most famous was the river Styx, the river of hatred, by whose waters even the gods swore their most binding oaths. To swear by the Styx was the most serious promise any divine being could make. Breaking such an oath brought consequences so severe that even Zeus would not risk it. The river Lethe was the river of forgetting. Souls who drank from it lost all memory of their previous lives, their families, their loves, their struggles, their joys. They became blank, ready for whatever came next. The river Acheron was the river of woe. The river Phlegethon burned with fire. The river Cocytus was the river of lamentation, its waters fed by the tears of the dead. To cross these rivers, souls needed a coin. A single coin placed over the eyes or in the mouth of the deceased, a tradition so widespread in the ancient Greek world that archaeologists still find coins in ancient burial sites today. Without a coin, you couldn't pay Charon, the ferryman, and you would wander the near shore for 100 years before being allowed to cross. This is why the Greeks were so careful about burying their dead. To leave a body unburied, without coins, was one of the cruelest things you could do, not just to the body, but to the soul. Part 3. The Geography of the Dead. Once across the rivers, souls arrived at the gates of the underworld proper. Those gates were guarded by Cerberus, the three-headed dog, loyal only to Hades, who let souls enter freely but never allowed them to leave. Cerberus is one of the most iconic figures in Greek mythology. 3 heads, a serpent for a tail, sometimes described with snakes growing from his back and neck. He was terrifying to look at, but he had a specific job: keep the dead in and the living out. He was not cruel for the sake of cruelty. He was simply the lock on the door between worlds. Beyond the gates, souls were brought before 3 judges: Minos, Rhadamanthus, and Aeacus. These were former kings, men who had been so wise and just in life that they were given the role of judging the dead for eternity. They evaluated the life each soul had lived, and based on that evaluation, the soul was sent to one of 3 destinations. The Elysian Fields, sometimes called Elysium, were reserved for the heroic, the virtuous, and the especially blessed. It was described as a paradise, meadows of perfect beauty, eternal sunlight, feasting, music, and rest. Some myths describe a further destination within Elysium called the Isles of the Blessed, for those so exceptional, so extraordinary, that ordinary paradise wasn't enough. The Asphodel Meadows were where most souls ended up. Not a place of punishment, but not a paradise either. A kind of neutral existence, gray and quiet, where ordinary souls who were neither exceptionally good nor exceptionally evil wandered without particular joy or suffering. Just existence without the weight of a living life. And then there was Tartarus. Tartarus was the deepest part of the underworld, so deep that the ancient Greeks said it was as far below the surface of the earth as the earth was below the sky. It was the place of punishment for the truly wicked, for those who had committed crimes so monstrous that ordinary death was not consequence enough. Here the Titans were imprisoned after their defeat. Here Sisyphus rolled his boulder up a hill for eternity, only to watch it roll back down every time he neared the top. Punishment for cheating death twice. Here Tantalus stood in a pool of water beneath fruit trees, forever hungry and thirsty, the water receding every time he bent to drink, the fruit rising out of reach every time he reached for it. Punishment for serving his own son as a meal to the gods. Here Ixion was bound to a spinning wheel of fire for eternity. The punishments in Tartarus were not random. They were perfectly, almost poetically fitted to the crime. They were the kind of punishments that a god with an infinite amount of time could design, because Hades had nothing but time. Part 4. The Silent King. And what of Hades himself? Where did he fit in this vast, dark kingdom? He sat on a throne of ebony, black wood, dark and hard and ancient. Beside him sat his queen, Persephone. At his feet, Cerberus lay. Around him, the palace of the dead stretched outward in all directions, vast, silent, lit by some sourceless dim glow that was neither day nor night. Hades was not an active presence in most of Greek mythology. He didn't wander Olympus. He didn't visit the mortal world looking for adventures or loves. He didn't participate in the politics and quarrels of the other gods with much enthusiasm. He stayed in his kingdom and ruled it, absolutely, impartially, and without exception. Every soul came to him eventually. It didn't matter who you were in life, how powerful, how beloved, how divine. Even the children of gods ended up in the underworld when their time came. Hades received them all without favoritism. This impartiality was, in its own way, the thing that made Hades most feared. Zeus could be appeased. Poseidon could be calmed. The other gods had preferences, favorites, moods that could be worked with. Hades did not negotiate. Death did not bargain. The kingdom of the dead had one rule. Once you arrived, you stayed. There were exceptions, a tiny handful of myths where someone managed to leave the underworld alive. Orpheus descended to retrieve his lost love Eurydice, and his music moved even Hades to tears. Heracles descended as one of his 12 labors and dragged Cerberus to the surface briefly. Psyche descended on an impossible errand and found her way back. But these were exceptions so rare they proved the rule. The underworld was a one-way door, and Hades was the one who held it shut. Part 5. The Abduction of Persephone. It begins with loneliness. Hades ruled his vast kingdom alone. The other gods had their loves, their families, their dramas unfolding across the bright world above. Hades sat in the dark with the dead for company. One day, some versions say while hunting, others say while picking flowers, he glimpsed Persephone. She was the daughter of Demeter, goddess of the harvest, and Zeus. Young, radiant, everything that the underworld was not. Hades fell in love immediately, completely, overwhelmingly. He asked Zeus for permission to marry her. Zeus, characteristically, neither said yes nor said no. He gave a vague, non-committal answer that Hades interpreted as permission. And so Hades did something he had never done before. He left his kingdom and came to the surface world. He opened the earth beneath Persephone's feet and took her down with him into the dark. Persephone's screams went unheard, or almost unheard. The goddess Hecate heard something, and the sun god Helios saw everything from his vantage point in the sky. But no one intervened. Demeter searched the entire earth for her daughter. For 9 days and 9 nights, she wandered, holding torches, refusing to eat or rest, asking every being she encountered if they had seen where Persephone had gone. The harvest stopped. Crops withered. The earth grew cold and barren. Humanity began to starve. Finally, Helios told her the truth, and Demeter's grief turned to fury. She refused to let anything grow until her daughter was returned. The earth continued to die. Zeus, facing a catastrophe, for without humans to worship and sacrifice, the gods themselves would eventually weaken, finally intervened. He sent Hermes to the underworld to retrieve Persephone. Hades agreed, but before Persephone left, he offered her food, pomegranate seeds. She ate 6 of them, and in the mythology of the ancient world, eating the food of the dead bound you to the realm of the dead. 6 seeds meant 6 months. A compromise was reached. Persephone would spend half the year in the underworld as queen beside Hades, and half the year on the surface with her mother. When Persephone is above ground, Demeter rejoices and the earth blooms. When Persephone returns to the underworld, Demeter grieves and the earth grows cold. This is how the ancient Greeks explained the seasons. It is also, if you look at it from a certain angle, one of the oldest love stories in the mythology. Not a simple one, not without darkness and without harm, but a story of a god who wanted something more than a kingdom of shadows, and who found it, and who held it in the most permanent way he knew how. Part 6. The Misunderstood God. Here is something worth sitting with. Hades was feared above almost all other gods. His name was spoken as rarely as possible. The ancient Greeks often called him by other names instead. Platon, which means the wealthy one, because all the precious metals buried in the earth belonged to him. Or simply the other one, the one below. But in the actual mythology, Hades is remarkably restrained. He doesn't cause suffering for entertainment. He doesn't punish unfairly. He doesn't pursue mortals or meddle in human lives for his own amusement. He administers his kingdom with strict but consistent rules. The punishments in Tartarus are terrible, but they are given to those who genuinely committed terrible acts. He was tricked occasionally. Sisyphus escaped death twice through cleverness, and Hades had to retrieve him personally the second time. He was furious about it, but once Sisyphus was back in the underworld, the punishment that followed was just and final. Compared to Zeus, who cheated constantly, punished out of ego, and ruled with the impulsiveness of someone who knew no one could truly stop him, Hades looks almost admirable. He had enormous power and used it within clearly defined boundaries. He just happened to be the god of the one thing that every human being feared more than anything else. Death, the unknown, the place you go and never come back from. It was never really about who Hades was. It was about what he represented. Part 7. Hades in later tradition. As Greek culture spread and evolved, and as Rome absorbed Greek mythology into its own religious tradition, Hades became Pluto. The Roman Pluto retained most of the same characteristics. The underworld, the helmet of invisibility, the 3-headed dog, the queen taken from the living world. But something shifted in the centuries that followed. As Christianity spread through Europe, the Greek and Roman underworld became conflated with the Christian concept of hell. a place of eternal punishment, ruled by a figure of evil. Hades was never that. He was a ruler, not a villain. A judge, not a torturer. A god of endings, not of evil. But the image stuck. And for centuries, the Lord of the Underworld became synonymous with the devil in popular imagination, a mistake that Greek mythology itself never made. Modern culture has slowly been recovering the more complex original. In contemporary stories, films, games, and books, Hades is increasingly portrayed as a complicated figure, powerful and cold, yes, but also fair, consistent, and in his own way, more honest than most of the gods of Olympus. Because Hades never pretended the world was something other than what it was. He didn't offer false hope or impossible promises. He simply said, "This is the end. Come in. Rest." There is a kind of peace in that, if you can find it. Closing. Somewhere beneath us, if you believe the ancient Greeks, a vast kingdom spreads in every direction. Its rivers carry memory and grief and forgetting. Its fields hold the shadows of every person who ever lived. Its gates are guarded by a creature with 3 heads and a heart loyal only to one master. And at the center of it all, on a throne of black wood, sits a god who never asked for the role he was given, who ruled it anyway with absolute authority, who fell in love once in all of eternity, and who keeps that love beside him in the only way he knows. Permanently, completely, forever. Hades is not the villain of Greek mythology. He is its most inevitable character. We will all meet him eventually. Every one of us. No matter who we are, no matter what we've done, no matter how brightly we burned in the world above. The Greeks knew that, and they built temples for the other gods, and made sacrifices to the other gods, and told stories about the adventures of the other gods. But Hades they mostly left in silence. Because some things don't need to be called upon. Some things come on their own, in their own time, without invitation. Thank you for listening. This was episode 3 of Gods of Olympus, the story of Hades. Next time, we return to the light, to the most radiant god on Olympus, the one who drives the sun across the sky, speaks in prophecies, and plays music that can stop the world. We tell the story of Apollo. Sleep well, or keep going, wherever you're headed. Either way, you know where we all end up eventually.